There's nobody in the public here. Anyone on Zoom would like to make a public comment, please enter the room. Nope. Nobody, Athena? Nope. Okay, great. Can join the webinar. Athena, would you mind screen sharing the agenda? Awesome. I'm gonna get logged in before we actually officially move to approve the minutes, but we have 3 groups of minutes. Are all 3 groups of minutes ready?
I received a set from Bernie this afternoon that I didn't have a chance to put in
Okay.
a packet, and so that one is not ready.
Okay. That's November 14th. Join without computer audio?
Correct.
Okay, great. Don't share. Excellent. Continue without. Okay. Excellent. That should be all set. Can folks on Zoom hear me okay on Zoom?
Mhm.
Yep,
Yes.
great. Awesome. Okay, so we'll get started with, I'll move to approve the October 10th meeting minutes. But can I have a second? Meg? Okay. All in favor? Bernie?
Fine. Aye.
Erica?
Yes.
Raphael?
Yes.
Marcus?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So those minutes should go out, unanimously approved. I'll make the motion to approve the October 24th meeting minutes. Second, anybody? Dan?
Sure.
Great. Okay, we'll go through the same thing again. Raphael?
Yes.
Great. Marcus?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Meg?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
Bernie?
Yes.
And Erica?
Yes.
Okay, those meeting minutes are also unanimously approved, and November 14th meeting minutes have not been posted yet. So we'll table that till the next meeting. We've already done public comment. Does anybody else on Zoom want to give a public comment?
Or just do we
Nope.
need to let people know how to make a public comment when they're on Zoom?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, if you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand and make a public comment. And if you're on the phone, you can press *9. Meg, you had a question?
Should we appoint someone to take?
Yes, I believe we have a minute taker list, so let me find that in my email. But we should have a minute taker list somewhere here. And I
Start soon,
am
so-
assuming we're following that, yeah. Yep. Okay, let me try to find this email. I think it was Bernie did the last one.
That's true.
So, I'm not sure who's next on the list.
I'm trying to find it.
Minutes, yeah, that's what I'm trying to find.
Ken is the next one.
Ken, are you all right taking minutes? Thank you. Okay, so now we'll get into the actual. Is the meeting being recorded?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Great. Okay. So for folks, if you want to raise your hand, if you're on Zoom, raise your hand on Zoom. If you're in person, you can raise your hand on Zoom or in person. I'll take both. Apologies if I and getting to the Zoom people a little bit later. And we'll get started on agenda point 4, which is the physical review of the home rule charter. Athena, for folks, if you want a physical copy, I believe, Athena, you said you have them? Okay. Does anybody need a physical copy? Nope. Great. Excellent. And you can also find it on the town website for those of us. Would you mind getting a few extras? Great. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so you can also find it online for folks who are on Zoom, amherstma.gov/charter. And we will get started. How do we want to approach this? Go ahead, Meg.
So I think this is a really good chance for us to find out where each other is on this.
Mhm.
Not to discuss things because we would be here all night. So I suggest, and it's time for us to know where each of us is coming from. I suggest going through them and that each of us identifies something we would like to review in the future. And that anyone could ask a clarifying question, but not debate it.
Great.
And then we might even say, do others agree
Yeah,
or not? So that we start to see where in the charter we're going to want to come back and focus.
Sure.
I think it's time for us to start to better understand who we all are around the table and what our hopes and wishes are out of this process.
great. Awesome. Andy?
Yeah, I'm glad we're walking through it, but I think part of it is just to orient ourselves to what the various clumps are that we would be
Interested in looking.
asking for input on. So I'm less interested in where we all are. I want to think about what the pain points might be being felt by people out there, and maybe that's the same thing. But for me, it's like, okay, in the legislative section, what am I hearing, or what are some possible areas where people might have thoughts, and then we start building our surveys or our outreach based on that. So for me, it's an orientation to the clumps, and then thinking about what aspects of each clump might invite
Great.
input.
Raphael?
And I would second what Andy shared. I think for me, reading the charge of this committee, it's not necessarily about us. I think this orients us, but I think it's more about like getting public awareness about this review process. So for me, where I'm sitting, it's not necessarily about how I see what I want, but just for us to orient ourselves moving forward through this process of gathering public input and just how to sort of focus on what's at hand.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll just say I agree with the general idea of having us as a committee go over things we want to focus on. We could sort of orient it as everyone can list off sections that they're interested in, and we can, I wouldn't say take a formal vote, but I'd like to see like thumbs up, down, sideways if other people are also interested, and we can record that in the minutes so that we know what sections of the charter we want to work on, but also what sections of the charter we want to get input in. Obviously, we're not trying to limit ourselves necessarily, so I'd like to see what section of the charter folks here have interest in, but also what sections of the charter. I feel like a big purpose of this is what sections of the charter do we want to get the public's input in so that we can discuss making recommendations. I feel like that's sort of an important step. Erica?
Thank you. My question was going to be, or comment was going to be about clarifying the goal of what we're doing with this particular piece of the process, which is like we each have maybe areas of expertise or areas that we're interested in. But as you, I think, just referred to, maybe it's the goal could be clearly stated that we are trying to develop well-informed questions for our public outreach, as opposed to us predetermining what areas of interest might be for the general public to comment on. So if you know, I would say if we review the section on financial policies and procedures, it's for the point of putting well-informed questions into our outreach, whether it's in questionnaires, in-person interviews, or whatever we decide to do, as opposed to our particular pet projects or interests in what's wrong with the charter.
I would tend to agree. I think that I'd like to see us working to use this so that we can say, hey, public, here's what we want to discuss with you. Here's what we want to bring to the forefront of our public outreach discussions, rather than here's my personal critique of the charter. I would completely agree. And I'd like to guide our conversation in that direction. Marcus?
Yeah, I just was going to agree with Erica. I think the worst thing we can do is just come at it open-ended into our public discussions, because we're just going to get nowhere.
Right.
So if we can, you know, like we're saying, get clumps, get familiarized with those clumps, then target those for the discussions with the public.
Yeah.
And working in that sort of a method, I think that would be very helpful for us and for them too, because I mean, it can be, it's overloading, you know, otherwise.
I agree. Bernie?
Yeah, I was just simply going to say that this isn't so much a question of what's wrong with the charter as how's it working? Is it being effective in terms of governance, and can people understand it? You know, so I want to look at this, but I also, as we go through the charter, I also have a copy of the council's rules of procedures, which I think, if not certainly not tonight, but at another point, as we identify these areas of interest, we then bring in those rules of procedure, because that's how the council sees its implementation of the charter. And so I think those have to count as well. But I'm not looking for good, bad, and different. I'm looking for what's working, what could work better. That's the approach I want to take as a citizen.
Great. Thank you, Meg.
I think I misspoke. I agree with the spirit of what everyone's saying, starting with Andy and Erica. I meant this is a chance for us to identify the places where we understand there to be questions that the public has that we've heard, or that we
Yeah,
ourselves have observed.
I would agree. I don't think we need a motion necessarily, but as we sort of delve deeper into this discussion, I'd like to just kindly, I'll remind people if we delve more into debating the sections of the charter or making our arguments, as opposed to sort of identifying areas for outreach to the public. So does anybody want to start? Bless you, Dan. Does anybody want to start with a section that they have an interest in? Andy?
I would say legislative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Section.
Article 2.
Yeah.
What, do you mind listing a subsection that you have an interest in?
Oh, I guess this is where we get into, are we listing everything that could be worked on, even if it can't be approved locally? Because I
Yes,
think there's a lot
I
of
would
interest
say list
in
anything.
in the size of the council. I think there's interest in the term of office. I think there's some interest in term limits on roles in the council and just serving on the council, I guess. There's interest in whether town employees can be members of the council. Those are the ones that jump out at
Excellent.
me at the beginning.
Awesome. So 2.6 is a section. You want to get a little thumbs. I agree. I think we definitely need to focus on 2.6. Excellent. Meg?
Yep.
Or excuse me, 2.2, section 2.
Article 2.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
2.6E, I believe there's a lot of interest in the committees, both their composition and whether citizens or residents can, who are not council members, can participate and vote.
Excellent. Marcus?
So it sounds like really, I mean, we're not talking about just legislative, right? I think we need to, there's so much diversity in what we're talking about right now. We need to really kind of create areas, I guess, that we can look into. So we're not just saying, oh, we're going to come to you with legislative questions, right? There's sub parts to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'll narrow in on it a little more. I would like to see us asking questions such as, do you believe that 13 counselors is representative? Or do you feel like a smaller or larger amount of counselors would be helpful? I would ask questions such as, do you ask the public questions like, do you believe in term limits? Do you believe if you're employed by the town or the school district, you should be able to run for elected office, etc.? I think those sort of questions would be helpful to guide these discussions, if you will, around section 2 or article 2, excuse me. Dan?
I also think there'd be a lot of merit in, I know there's concern about just open-ended questions in public meetings, but to approach counselors and past counselors to say not to say, these are our questions to you, but you did this job. What have you seen?
Yeah.
To have it be guided more by their experience. I mean, I know a couple counselors have talked about term limits from the point of view of it takes a long time just to get the skills to do this, that basically, like, having done the job, they have perspectives that really could inform part of where we take this.
Yeah.
And never having been in their seats, if I were approaching, that would be more my philosophy. Tell me what you learned from this. I'm particularly interested in the people who worked both in town meeting and on council. I think Pam Rooney is one of the, I don't know who they are, but that some of the people with that perspective, most of them. Okay, so I mean, that's like, as a comparative thing, like, you now have experienced 2 really different forms of legislature. What have you, again, I guess to make it short, this open-ended thing. Tell us what you would see different, what frustrated you, what worked, etc.
I would say, oh, sorry, just quick.
Could you raise your hand? Sure. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to keep some.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. Sorry. One of the things I think we kind of need to think about too is how we're asked those questions too. I know, Julian, you were just talking about, well, is 13 enough? That's a leading question, right? Because that comes across as, I don't think 13's enough, right? So we've got to be very careful about, you made a good point. I don't want to influence your thoughts, but I'm giving you a question that is.
Right.
So I've got to be very careful about that when we get there.
How it's worded. Yeah, we'll have a time to discuss that a little later tonight to an extent. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very similar point that it's like, what do you think of the size of the council as opposed to, yeah.
Yep. I would, Andy, sorry.
Yeah, I think this is gonna help us think about the sequencing of asking questions too. I mean, how do you lead into this stuff? You can get down into the weeds pretty quickly. And so I think we may want to think about this sort of as an iterative process. So, piggybacking, I think, on what Dan was saying, you can go in and ask general questions about, okay, what's working and what's not working about the council, and especially asking counselors, but also asking people in the general public, rather than getting into every single subsection of section 2. But I think, so maybe we have an initial outreach that is like, okay, section 2 is about the council. We'll figure out some questions about, what seems to be working and what seems to not be working. Or, I'm not as interested in comparing the council to town meeting, because I don't think we're talking about going back. We're talking about, how do we make sure this form of government gets better? And so maybe we need to stay more general. Okay, council is section 2, manager is section 3, find, budget is section 5, whatever, and have sort of general outreach, and then digest that. And then we come up with more specifics when we can start probing more deeper, but it's a modular approach or a drilling down approach. Because I'm afraid we'll lose people if we get too specific right off the bat. Or else we'll just get people who already know the thing and know what they want to say.
Bernie, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Andy said a good part of what I was going to say. I mean, I think what we need to do is take a look at each of these sections and say, where are some points to talk about in general? And then look at how we can do some forums or information gathering about each section. So I'm pretty much agreeing with what Andy was suggesting.
Okay. Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to second or third, I guess, the point that finding sort of general categories to ask questions about and asking general questions about those categories is really important. Like well-framed general questions that aren't leading, that are like more like soliciting general thoughts on the size of the council as an example, as opposed to asking whether or not 13.9 is the right number. That's one point. The other point is the audience is going to matter. We've talked about many different audiences for this outreach and these questions. Asking certain kinds of questions of the town council that has a certain kind of professional experience in these roles is very different than asking the general public. So I think we should be ready to create a category called the eligibility and practice of serving as a town councilor, and then ask some questions under that category and prepare to tailor those questions to different audiences. The third thing I wanted to say is that I feel that no matter what, in whatever context, we need to be able to allow for a lot of open comment that isn't solicited by a direct question from us or our process, because I think we will. Since we can't ask a question about everything in this charter, there may be things that people come that we haven't identified or pre-written a question about, and I think we need to just always leave that wide open space for things that we may have missed.
Dan?
I think the word iterative was good too, and there's interaction too. So there's kind of tension. I mean, what comes to my mind is the rule of public comment. The counselors have one experience of that, and the public has a very different experience. And so, there certainly is frustration that you get to speak. There's no interaction. If you're in the council, they have long meetings. If I understand that, so how that can. That would be in a way a dialogue, like, okay, so as we refine it, okay, so you've been on the council, how do you see an improvement in this so that you can not go home at midnight, but people can be leave having actually felt like they've engaged with their representatives.
I think that's a rules of procedure thing to an extent, but not to limit it off entirely, because A, I think we can discuss the rules of procedure a little. B, I would say that it also may be worth us adding something to the charter to engage, allow the counselors to engage more. I'm going to bring up within Article 2, the section 210 C, which is the right to postpone. We've seen one counselor use that 3 or 4 times, and then a few other counselors use it once or twice. I think it's just worth us discussing as a committee and feeling as to whether we think it's fair, etc. So I'd like to see that on the table.
Yeah,
Meg?
I think the broader question was.
Excuse me, Bernie. Meg?
Just one more thing before we leave committees. I've heard a number of people.
Your mic? That's why.
Just
Bernie-
before we
yeah.
leave committees, a question of if the membership on committees is limited to council members, how do we bring in expertise that's sometimes needed and doesn't have to be in those committee members? And that's particularly true of the planning board, although that does have non-council members, but bringing in skills and talent, experience that would be helpful to the process. How do we do that, particularly on committees?
Bernie?
Yeah, as somebody who's a citizen representative on the finance committee, I found it interesting. And there should be a better way of recruiting people in on these and expanding the committees, but that's something we'll need to discuss and talk about. The other thing that comes up in terms of section 210, the bylaws and other measures, is how do people have access to that? How do people have the ability to propose a bylaw? How does that system work? Is that effective for folks? That also gets us into rules and procedures. But that's another area that we want to look at is, how you don't have the old 10 citizen petition anymore. So how do people who have a concern raise that concern and communicate it to the council?
Yep, Marcus?
So I think what Bernie, you're talking about adding to the, to the charter to have, this is how you would do this,
Well, do
like a
people?
how-to guide almost.
Well, it would be
Potentially.
it would be, how does it work now? How does it work now? And is there a way to make it more effective? To give people access to propose a bylaw or to move or for councilors to move something through. It's just again, it's a general kind of question, but how accessible is your government when you want to propose something and move it along? That's all.
Andy?
Yeah, this is just making me think then about how do we ask the questions about, say, this section, and it seems to me that we would want to write up Article 2, legislative branch specifies these things, boom, 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 boom. And then what questions do you have, or what concerns or interests do you have about those things? And then let people take it from there to start. And then there may be a next iteration, we start probing, but to be able to have a summary of, this is what section 2 says and control and covers. It covers how the council operates, and it includes how many of them there are, what the president does, blah, 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 blah. And then we ask the open-ended question, but at least the counselors may not need that, but even they might not know what section 2 is. And certainly the general public would benefit from it.
Yeah. Raphael?
Yeah, I'm following this process respectfully. In many ways, I get the tension between our interest, but I personally don't want to do the work away from the public. I want to do this work with the public. So what do I mean by that? There are different parts of this charter. I think people are deciding their interest. The tension that I'm having is, how are we getting the public to provide feedback about their experience or sort of views about the parts of this charter? There are many different ways to do it. I think right now we're leaning into like questioning and what questions, but questions in a public meeting with a focus group deployed quite differently from a survey sent to certain folks. I don't want to lose sight of that, at least for me. So I'm going to listen, but I think that part of the work is also crucially important and time intensive. And I want to sort of lean into that. Like, how are we getting public feedback on parts of this charter? And the charter is hard to understand. So like unpacking that and how we will share parts of this charter with the public, how we will get their input or perspectives about it is crucially important too. And it doesn't have to be done in the same way. So I'm just listening, but I want to sort of, in my thinking, that's what I'm centering.
Excellent. I'm gonna have a comment myself and then I will call on, I think I first saw Dan, then Andy, then Erica. I will bring up Article 3 I'd like to look at section 3.2, executive and administrative powers and duties. And I think that this is a worthwhile question when we determine like checks and balances in our government and what is an appropriate check and balance. That it may be worth looking into that. I have specific interest in section I about the annual budget, as well as section L about awarding contracts, but that is just my personal interest. Do we agree, disagree, feel like that's something we should look into? L, yes. 3.2
What was the
L.
first one? Sorry.
The first one was prepare and submit the town council an annual budget. Yep, I and L is awarding contracts. And this is under executive and administrative powers.
Oh, yeah,
Do we have interest in reviewing this as a committee?
I think it's something that should come up.
Yeah.
I would expect it to come from the public or some of the people operate.
Okay, Dan? Your comment?
I think this may be in agreement with what Raphael said, that focusing a lot on the charter, there's one perspective on it, but in a way, expecting people to speak charterese isn't really reasonable.
Okay.
And so I think that there is an interpretive part of this, that if you're listening to people to educate, to say this is there, but also to say, well, if someone doesn't have time to read this thing, it doesn't mean they don't have feedback to give about what it is to live under this structure of government. So yeah, too much focus on the words on the page. And you can say, Raphael, if this is in agreement with, or
Yeah.
in the ballpark with what you're saying, but that's
where I'm at. Yeah.
yeah, no, I think that's really important for us not to be too, it's like, how do you find your way from a non-legal perspective of this to, is there what we've heard, maybe there are the people who are active, who are paying attention, but many people who aren't. And it's like, okay, we've heard this comment many times. How does that reflect on the charter? That seems to me to neglect that would be a mistake.
Andy?
Yeah, and this may bleed over into one of our later subject areas, but I think as I'm looking through this and as I'm listening to what we're all talking about, it's driving home to me how nuanced we need to be about asking the questions, and that we need different framing of questions for different audiences. We need to offer people a way into giving feedback that allows them to come from where they are. And I'm just thinking that, a consultant who's worked with other charter review committees has probably seen and tried to wrestle with this challenge. And so I think, we need to be really thoughtful about the language. And I think maybe a consultant could help us do that.
Great. Erica?
Yeah. Just first reacting to the last thing said, I'm in agreement, I think, with what Andy and Dan and Raphael are all saying to a certain extent. I'm a little hesitant to jump to a consultant to help us wrestle with these problems, but I could be convinced, but I just feel a little hesitant to go to that immediately. But I just wanted to reiterate where Raphael started and Dan continued, that there's a really big and clear difference to me between reviewing the charter as a legal written document and reviewing the charter as a lived experience of government, of our literal home rule. In other words, if we get really bogged down in section 2.8 subclause, whatever, that's not an experience of lived government. That's the final thing. In other words, if I'm in an encounter with someone from the public who's never read the charter, I still want to know how they feel about how the town is being run. And I want to have the conversation and say, what's your biggest beef with what's going on? And they say to me, I don't feel like I have enough time to make a public comment in the town meeting or whatever. And then I say, okay, well, in the town charter, it says you should be allowed 2 minutes. How do you feel about that? Right? In other words, the charter, the language of the charter itself to me is sort of like third down the path as opposed to first. This is kind of why I don't want to go to a consultant first, because I feel like we're going to get really rather legalistic about it. And I want it to be much more, I would hope that we could stick with a much more lived experience. Someone doesn't have to have read and understood all of these clauses in order to have a lived experience and a comment about how it feels to be a citizen of Amherst.
Bernie?
Well, I just, as you're talking here, I'm reading our charge. And I think we're gonna have to come to the understanding, or at least, and I can certainly hold these two things in my head, is that one, you have a general kind of discussion about what kind of impact the charter has. I'm talking about lived experience, your understanding of it, your ability as a citizen to thrive under it. That's one thing that we're charged with. But we're also charged with, does this thing work well? And does it work well in terms of the law and the existing charter? So we have to do both things. We have to do some outreach, and we have to make sure that we get people involved in this. But we're also going to have to, and this goes back to my experience on the bylaw review committee, we're also going to have to get down into the weeds sometime and say, this is where we need to change, or this is what could be improved, or this is what's working really well, do more of it. And I do think that getting in a consultant, be it an individual or a group, who's had some experience in this can be helpful, because we're going to have to head in two directions and bring them all back together. And I think that, and some of us will prefer to do the nuts and bolts down and dirty stuff. Others of us will prefer to do the outreach and the talking. But we're going to have to, at the end of it, we're going to have to all pull it all together. And I really do think we need to bring in people who've had better experience at this than we have, or more experience at this than we have. And they're not going to run the show. They're going to advise us. Help lay things out so we can move these things through and say, these are our goals. This is what we need help in, and push forward with it. So I'm agreeing with Andy again. I think the sooner we can identify an individual or a group who can help us, the more effective we'll become.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I would phrase it a little bit differently, as in sort of a comment of my own. I see the job of our committee is to basically gather the public input and then be the machine that turns that out into recommendations. We take what we hear, we apply our expertise to it, and thus on the outside of that comes recommendations for change in the charter. If 100 citizens tell us we really want blank provision struck from the charter, we find a way to reword or rewrite that provision. That's sort of what I see as our role here. But I'd like to get us back on track a little to discuss other sections. I see that Article 2, pretty much the entire Article 2 is something we'd like to look over and review. I know I mentioned some things in Article 3 we'll review. Other areas that people would like to review, I will bring up Article 5. I think most of Article 5 needs reviewing, the financial policies and procedures, and how our budgets work and all of that sort of thing, and how we could potentially make that more inclusive to public input and more democratic. Meg?
Just going back to Article 4, I know it's not in our charge, but I think the terms of the school committee is problematic, and other people have said that as
Mhm.
well, particularly that they're not staggered. The Amherst School Committee members have 2-year terms, and the other 3 towns have 3-year terms. So in effect, while Amherst is 80 or so % of the school budget, our school committee members have in effect less authority because they have shorter terms. I know that's not what we're supposed to be talking about, but I'm just saying I've heard that a lot. And there are other issues around the question of the council having 2-year terms that are not staggered is problematic in some people's opinion, because you have theoretically you could have a total turnover of the council.
Andy?
Yeah, I would agree that that the terms of office are problematic. I know that when we were on the Charter Commission, we were told that it could either be 2 or 4, without some sort of heroic heavy lift by the legislature. So, but I agree that it's problematic to have the entire government on the ballot, all the offices on the ballot at once. I think it's hard for people to keep track of all the counselors and all the school committee members and all the library trustees and all the, competitive for each of those positions. It's a lot. And so, but when we were doing the charter, we felt that a 4-year was a heavy lift to get people to volunteer to sign up for 4 years. So 3 really does feel good. And it might be something that we want to, figure out how to recommend it. It may just be one of the longer term things rather than shorter term.
And do we know why they
Um,
said it was either 2 or 4? Sorry.
Marcus?
Oh, do we know why it was either 2 or 4?
Okay, great.
And then the other one, sorry, I mean, we're talking about staggering, there's also the opportunity of keeping the groups the same, but staggering, so like the school committee wouldn't have the same election timeframe as the council, but all the councils will still be up all the time, rather than, I think we're talking about, potentially having half and half go at different, odd and even years sort of thing. But there's,
I think it's an area we can explore. It was complicated.
Bernie?
Yeah, I was chuckling because as a selectman, I served many 3-year terms. In the towns I worked in, all the selectmen had 3-year terms, which seems to be more comfortable. 2-year term is, in my humble opinion, is too short. I have a feeling, and this again, where a consultant might come in handy, if not, because I don't know that we need an attorney for this, someone who's familiar with the black law. It's probably buried somewhere in the state legislation around prototype charters for cities. We keep calling ourselves a town, but we have to remember we're a city. And in cities in Massachusetts have a different set of rules from town government.
Yeah, I'm remembering why.
Andy?
That as a city, we have our election, we moved our elections from the spring to the fall to coincide with when people expect to have elections, and we figured it would increase turnout. But then you're worried about overlapping with presidential or gubernatorial elections. So there's state elections and then there's local elections. So it might be possible, and I don't want to get into the weeds, but it's there is law that covers it, and we could dig into it.
That's Article 7.
And I think we should.
Yep, that's Article 7, which I do think we should look at. Meg, then Dan?
Just to add on to what Andy said, because the elections are November now, the newly elected councilors come onto the council in March or January, right in the middle of the budget process compared with when they were elected in March, and they came in at the end. So in theory, you could have all new people coming in to talk about the budget halfway through the process.
Dan?
2 comments. One, reference to what Meg said about our charge is to remember what's in the charter. It says we're to make any recommendations we think necessary or desirable. So that, whatever the council has put in their specific charge, it doesn't trump what's in the charter. We have a lot
Right.
of leeway. And the other is in terms of consultants, we have resources we don't have to pay for. We have other charter committees from other towns. That it really is, it depends on our own personal proclivities. If you're willing to look at them and look at what did they do? And some of them say, what did we do? We looked at other towns who had done this before us. So like the Bridgewater review from 2014 that's in one of our packets, the first thing they did, and this is kind of maybe bringing a bunch of this together, is they said, well, is this working better than the last system? And they went out and asked people. And not that not in the go backwards thing, but willing to say, let's just get a sense. Then they came back and they voted and they said, yeah, we really found out it is. And now let's work on refining it. But that really broader general way, as people are approaching this task for the first time, in a new, this town, the city has never had this before. So that just seems like drawing on other people's experience is a resource that's free. And if we're willing to spend the time, we could each take a report and say, this is what I learned about what other people did before us. That would be a $0 approach.
Ken?
First of all, taking minutes is a very encompassing thing. I have very little chance to talk, and that's just the way it
I will
is.
give you an encouragement, which is if you want to talk more, watch the recording and write the
course.
minutes off the recording. Don't even touch it now. You can do it that way. If
Yeah,
that's
I've
more
got notes all
comfortable.
over this to go back
Okay,
and look at the
great.
recording. So, sorry, I
Awesome.
don't want to cut the knees out from this
No,
particular
that's-
conversation, but I think it's the legislative piece. I don't have the charter in front of me, it's just the minutes, but I don't think that there is any sort of option to recall elected people.
There is not.
And so that's something that seems kind of normal to me and
Yeah.
totally reasonable to bring
Mm.
up. And anyways, perhaps that'll come up.
I
in the public
completely
comment.
agree. I would like to see us have some interest in that. Yeah, no, I'd like to have us look into that as well as the like potentially staggering terms. I'll bring up something else, or actually go ahead. Andy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I like the idea of looking through whatever reports we have, and I'd love to do that. And especially if they have their, data collection instruments, I'd like to see that. But if an extension of that, that's what a consultant could help us do too, because they've dealt with a number of, they could say, oh, well, we dealt with a number of these places and this is how we started. This is how we did with the general public. This is how we did with the elected officials. This is how Bridgewater did. This is how Framingham did it, blah, blah, blah. So in terms of developing outreach instruments, I think that's part of what a consultant could help us do. Not to get into the weeds, although a legal consultant could help us turn it into legal language. But for me, it's more important just to have somebody figure out how to ask. How do we ask for input in ways that people can actually give it?
Right. I'll make a comment myself. I see section 5.4 subsection A, which is submission of budget message. Says not later than April 1, the proposed budgets adopted by the Amherst School Committee, Regional School Committee, and the library trustees shall be submitted to the town manager. I would like us to look into that. I think it's potentially problematic that we have basically duly elected bodies that residents from the town elect, being in the position of sort of begging for money to the executive as opposed to sort of having autonomy over their own budgets and budget amounts. So I'd like to see us look into that.
I would disagree with that if we're going to debate it. I think it's an unfortunate statement. Nobody goes begging for money. There's a process. And yes, it's the town manager's responsibility to shape the budget because that's what the statute requires.
Andy?
Yeah, the state used to have autonomous school committees, and they changed it in law that, you know, the town has to have an executive and a legislature that covers the town. And so we used to, I mean, in certain states, school committees have taxing authority, and they can just say, here's what we
Right.
need, here's what we need to tax you guys, and Massachusetts isn't one of those states. So I think the overall responsibility for the town is in this system is the manager and the council. And so the school committee, they can't tell the school committee how to spend the money that they get, and they should take seriously the request for money from the school committee. But they can't have the kind of a complete autonomy to raise money.
Right, no, I don't think we're necessarily, I'm not as much aiming to say we need to make a revision here as much as I'm saying this is something we should discuss. I'm not suggesting a specific revision. I'm not sure if that's what you were interpreting, but I'm not suggesting a specific revision as much as saying if we look at what's happening with our schools and our town budgets, this is something we as a committee should be discussing and potentially changing. Other comments, areas of concern? Anywhere in the charter, yeah, pick a place, any place. Okay,
I've heard a lot of interest in participatory budgeting, which is on page 37, 10.11.
Yep. You use your mic, press the button.
Oh. How much did you
For
get?
folks on Zoom, Meg is talking about participatory budgeting. Go ahead.
There's people, a number of people out there have brought to my attention participatory budgeting, which is in the charter under section 10.11. There was a committee that made a report to the council, and it hasn't been acted on. And there's some new ideas, I think, of how that might be implemented. In New Jersey, for example, the Robert Johnson Foundation funds all New Jersey participatory budgeting programs. So I just think that's a high interest in terms of increasing participation within the charter as it was written. It's right there.
Yeah, I agree. I think also like this is sort of a unique discussion in the sense that the participatory budgeting was already in the charter. It just wasn't done. So now does our committee goal, we're not the finance committee, but does our committee goal involve rewriting the charter in a way that it's more workable? Or does our committee goal involve sort of enforcing the charter that's already been there but hasn't been completed? Meg?
I think it's important to note that ranked choice voting is in there also, but it's indicated that it will happen and the committee
Right.
was to figure out how, as opposed to participatory budgeting, which is in there, but not committed to yet. That it would be
Exactly.
a future decision of the council.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, part of our stuff is to create recommendations, right? I mean, one of the recommendations would be to revisit this, and we would rewrite it to that outcome. Whether it is kind of a future thing, like with the ranked choice voting, you know, keep exploring this when it's available or whatever, you know, it just make it, don't just leave it there. Make something out of it, either do it or don't, but just be aware of that.
I would say we could maybe include a directive, establish a participatory budgeting committee or something like that, but I'm not trying to go too far down this
Well,
rabbit
that's
hole.
what-
It's certainly
that's what
something we
happened.
should look at.
That's what happened. It's what happened. I mean, there was a committee and the charter requires the creation of a commission. So, you know, we're not rewriting anything. What we're saying or what we may be saying is that you need to go, you know, here's the blueprint. What is keeping, what's prohibiting it from being acted on. In C, they proposed a measure. It doesn't say the council has to accept the measure. So there's a difference there. So,
Right. I think it might also be worth having someone from the town finance staff or from the council. We should talk with them and be like, hey, why hasn't this been done? How could we write it so that it's more workable? Andy, then Marcus, then Meg. You didn't have your hand up? Okay, gotcha.
I've heard it, some about the unwieldiness of the way public forums are written now or whatever, because what I've heard is, I think we said that at least half of the time must be spent by people from the public talking. And in many cases, people from the public don't have half of the time of words to say. And so then I've heard of meetings where the counselors are sitting around waiting for a certain amount of time to elapse so that they can say that the public had equal time. And so I think within the realm of reasonableness, that we should be able to wait to encourage public participation while not requiring, a strict time period. So I think that's an area we should look into.
Marcus?
Sorry, quickly, just one of the things, there's a lot of stuff in here that's written about the past. Certain dates, certain deadlines, just needs to get cleared out, right? This charter is a living document. I don't care that in 2018, I had to have something done by 5 PM.
Oh, the transition.
Yeah, all the stuff, I think we need to, one of our sessions, go through saying, hey, we're gonna go through and take these things out. There's other things in here as well, various places in here where we've got dates and times, and the first session of the council will do this. Well, the first session was years ago. So let's talk about, if it's a case of every new council, that's great, but word it that way. So.
Meg, and then I have my own thing. Yep.
Follow up what Andy said about the public forums. I completely agree about how artificial it sometimes is. In addition, the counselors aren't supposed to comment. And so it's very kind of, not only is it not dynamic, but there's often a lack of clarity about what the public person said. So to allow clarifying questions, or when you say this, what did you mean? Or it's just to allow, otherwise it almost seems like the council didn't even hear it because they're just sitting there, thank you for your comment. And somehow to make that comment, the public participation more dynamic and more authentic would be really good. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but no, it's just, I'm just following up on what you said about the requirement that it has to last a certain amount of time. It's also, it seems to me there's a expectation that the council won't speak at all when there's a public comment, even when there are questions that might be asked.
Exactly. That's a rules of procedure thing, but I agree that warrants some discussion because we don't just have to recommend changes. We can recommend additions, right? We as a committee can recommend additions. And if we wanted to add something in a specific section or article, that is also within our provision. And I think that what Meg's mentioning is a worthwhile point to consider for an addition. I'll add something myself and then I'll call on Bernie and then I'll call on Andy. What I would add is I'm looking at Article 6, Section 6.2B, which is appointing and promotions in administrative sections. Whenever a vacancy occurs, the town has to keep a notice on the bulletin board and not fill that position for no less than 14 days. In my understanding, that makes us pretty uncompetitive with other municipalities who can offer people positions on the spot. And that makes us as a town not as able to recruit people if someone applies for a job here and applies for a job in Belchertown, and Belchertown comes back to them the next day and says, hey, we want to hire you. Are they going to wait on Amherst for 14 days? Probably not. So that's something to consider, I think. Bernie?
Yeah, this actually goes back to the discussion about public comment, because I think I've heard a lot about it as well, from people saying, well, I don't understand this, like there's no dialogue. I think people need to discriminate between public comment at the start of the meeting where any citizen can bring up anything, whether it's on the agenda or not, versus public comments at a budget hearing or a budget session, where you may want to dialogue with the people, and because they're staying on topic, it's posted, people know that they can talk about certain things, and that it's tough sometimes to draw the distinction between them. We've all been in meetings where in the middle of the meeting somebody comes in and raises something that's out of left field, totally off the agenda, maybe inappropriately. But we can, I think, when we have the public participation sections, I think we can safely say that counselors can dialogue with people at public participation sections, so long as it's targeted. The discussion is about an advertised topic. And that's just a subtle fix that would take care of a lot of challenges, I think.
Yeah, Andy?
Yeah, the public comment thing, I'm not sure if that's rises to the level of the, constitution of the town, or if it's more like the rules of each of the bodies, because I think I can't remember, do we have something specific that every meeting must have public comment in here? We do, okay.
Mhm.
So, but I think that, you get into a conflict with the agenda versus what people want to talk about. And so I think that, individual bodies should probably have the flexibility to decide whether they want public comment at the beginning, whether they want to have public comment be interactive when it's on the agenda topics, or, public comment at the beginning could be just surfacing things for future meetings to talk about. And then in a hearing, public comment is part of the hearing because it's on topic. So I think there's some nuance there that we need to recognize.
Yeah, I'll bring up another section, which is 5.5C, which is action by the town council on the budget. It says that in amending the budget, the town council may delete or decrease any programs or amounts, except expenditures required by law, but it may not increase any item or the total of the proposed budget. I would say I see that may be problematic if, say, the council wanted to decrease an item with the effort to fund a different item, or if the council, say, like in 50 years, libraries are defunct. Okay, so we've now removed $5 million from the budget or whatever it is. Where does that $5 million go? Back to the taxpayers? Back to the town manager to decide what to do with it? I think it's fair for the council to have some more say in that. So I think that's an area that we should definitely review. Andy?
The reason that language is in there is that's in state law that a council can only reduce a budget. The chief executive has to present the budget. The council can request that their employee increase it, and they can fire him if he doesn't. But they can't increase the budget unilaterally, is my understanding. But again, that might be something.
That holds true whether you have a mayor or a manager. It's statutory. Gets me back to the point that I raised a while ago, that it might be helpful to have the town attorney come in and give us a lay of the land about what is statutory, what isn't, where there's some flexibility, where there isn't.
Yeah, Meg?
This makes me think we should be also thinking about letting the public know which parts of the charter are statutory requirements, because some of what we've just been talking about, people have strong feelings that this is somehow, I don't have to say, I think everybody knows what I'm talking, bad thing, but we didn't have a choice in that. So it'd be good not to make a big deal out of it, but to let people know when something's in the charter because it was required, that that's the case.
Marcus?
Yeah, I think, Andy, you talked about going in there with like a summary, right? This is what's here, this is what is in this section, bang, 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 bang. And next to each section, you just say whether it's, good to go or whether we have to, whatever it is, like, just to, like you say, let people know that, look, it's there and has to be there. It's there, it doesn't have to be there. It's, I should say optional or enforced or something that just, yeah.
Unless we want to ask our legislators to change state law.
Yes,
Well,
which we
that would
could
be
recommend.
but that's a valid thing,
Yeah,
right? If
sure.
if everybody in town says, well, yes, this is what they say, but for reasons X, Y, Z, this is why we think otherwise, we can work with our, that gives us the opportunity then to say, look, the town of Amherst would suggest that we pursue this or whatever. Sorry, not the town. People in the town of Amherst suggest, yeah.
Yeah, I would also say like it's important that we look into like maybe this would be the role of a consultant, but rather than writing off a section like that entirely saying we can't do blank, so don't touch it, it might be better to have a consultant who says, well, state law says this, but you could work around that if your goal is allowing the council to decrease funds in one area, increase funds in another area. You could work around that by proposing this type of language. For example, I know Cambridge has a provision like that, etc. So I think that that is sort of where the role of a consultant may come in here. I'll bring up actually also Article 5.7 or Section 5.7, Article A and B, which is about the capital improvement program. It says the town council shall establish the requirements for the inventory, age, condition, mileage, etc. of the town's buildings and vehicles, which are considered capital assets. So I would just say I see this as, I don't believe the council has done this. I could be incorrect, but I don't believe the council has done this. And I see the result of that is potentially problematic where Amherst schools have school buses that have like 310,000 miles, but then we replace like some police and public works vehicles at like 80 or 90,000 miles, which obviously for anyone who's owned a car doesn't make sense. So I would just say I see this as somewhat problematic in it is basically asking the council to do something that hasn't been done. So we should consider at least discussing with some of the town staff, how could we make this doable? And as well as some of the town councilors. Andy?
I mean, it sounds like that would be an area for a question, like,
Yeah.
is this happening?
Right.
If it's not happening,
Why
why
not?
not? Are there logistical reasons or are there, is there something we should change about it?
Right.
But, that is one thing we certainly could do as we're talking to town staff or council members or whatever, to say, some of these things, it says they're gonna do it. Are they, if we're hearing that they're not doing it, we could
Right.
ask why.
Exactly. Excellent. Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go right back to the beginning. Section 1, are we a town or are we a city?
We're technically a city.
I know,
known
but
as the
I
town.
know, but the right, but the section doesn't, it gets very hit or miss about what we are and what we aren't, and I think it needs to get cleared up. So,
Andy, you have more experience with this.
That it's actually a designation, the city known as the town of Amherst, and Greenfield is the city known as the town of Greenfield. And, it's, in some ways, it was a, it might have been a transitional way of doing it because we'd always been a town. And I think there was a sense that the inhabitants liked considering themselves a town, but we're going to a city form of government with a council. So,
right.
but But we could certainly recommend that we just change all this to the city of Amherst.
Well, no, I'm not saying, yeah, I mean,
I don't know if people like it or
there's
not.
some middle ground there maybe, but I'm just looking through, right? And section 1.4, the powers of the town. Well, we're not a town, we're a city known as the town of Amherst. So are we a city or are we a town? It's like, again, just the nuances of the writing, I think needs to get addressed, but
We-
that's something to discuss.
We're a town, this is how I describe it. We are a city in a function and a town in our image.
Right.
That's one way of saying
Yeah.
it, I guess you could
It's
say.
it's a Peter Pan. issue.
Yeah,
It's like we don't want
exactly.
to grow up.
The other thing is like in other states, many other states have towns that have city councils and a town manager or city council and a mayor that are still towns. So it's sort of a unique eccentricity of Massachusetts law, I guess you could say. Not a bad one necessarily, but just something that's different from how it's done elsewhere in the country.
Absolutely, but I think to my point is just like the charter needs to get cleared up as to, the powers of the town. We're not a town, we're a city. So it's powers of the town, powers of the city of the town of Amherst or
Right.
something, there just needs to be bulletproof.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Just
right ahead.
having labored over this, it's I think we could probably put something right up front to say within this chart, Amherst has a city form of government under Mass General Law. Within this charter, due to tradition, we will refer to the town of
Yeah.
Amherst as the town, and then the town, it'll say town.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Other sections of the charter people want to bring up? Andy, go ahead.
If I could just sort of reiterate, I think the point that Marcus made, I think we could look very hard at Article 10, which is called transition provisions. I don't think we need transition provisions anymore. So maybe
could
just
delete it,
excise anything that was talking about how we transitioned from the former form of government to this one. So that would, at least would make it shorter.
Yeah.
Meg?
Do we know if a city form of government has to have elections in November, or can they be in March?
I believe they have to be in November. I mean, an attorney would know better than I do, but I believe they have to be in November.
Yeah, that would be worth finding out before we get everyone all involved in discussing when the election should be.
Yeah,
Well, town elections are driven by the town's budget and by the date of town meeting. Because elections on a town level are actually a function of town, a function of town meeting. With cities, you have a different, again, you have those sample prototypes that are, I think they're still embedded in law. So that's why the November elections are the November elections and not March. Because, other than Vermont where they have town meeting day, throughout New England, towns have municipal elections that all scattered around in the spring, around when town meetings occur.
yeah. I would just add one thing, which is like we could also sort of again add to the charter, as in like we could add a provision that the budget be approved by the voters instead of by town council in March or in November.
It's,
So
there's a statute, a state law that requires that stuff. That's why I think it's important, one more time, it's important that we have council come in
I don't even know.
and review, to the town attorney come in and review what's statutory and what isn't, what we can change by vote of the council, what we can change by simple legislation, and what's basically off the table because it's too heavy of a lift to get the other 350 towns to go along with it. That's it's real basic to get a basic understanding of this stuff, and also to give the public, because this will be recorded, people can view it, to give the public an understanding of what this process is. It's not neat and clean, I'm sorry.
Dan?
An attorney could also grant us the serenity to tell the difference between.
That all?
Yeah.
Yep, okay, yep, great. Raphael, I saw your hand up for a minute, but I'll go back to you. No, okay. Other sections, trying to wrap this discussion up because we're only on point 4 and it's almost 8 o'clock. No? Excellent.
Raphael is talking, but we can't hear him.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry.
sorry.
I'm hoping that the public has an opportunity to do what we just did. We heard a lot of voices about what they see wrong with said charter, what should change, a lot of misconceptions to which is highly problematic. But I'm hoping that we move forward in trying to come up with some mechanisms to provide the public with opportunities to do what we just did. That data informs our work. So I just want to reiterate that.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. Magno, raise your hand if you'd like to comment. Dan,
Building on what Raphael said, I mean, I think that maybe this is a place for a subcommittee, because I'm really hearing different currents that are, running through this of Raphael, I think Erica, and I'm in some of the legal stuff, which I've introduced later in the agenda, but very much I think I'm in that camp. That's why I signed up for this. So if that's true, then this would be a place where we could draw best. And Bernie mentioned this earlier also, that we have different interests. Maybe that we're approaching a place where we could branch off and people who really that's driving, we can begin to work in the place where we want to put our energy.
Yeah.
Andy?
What is that place? The legal place or what?
Well, I
No.
mean, I think that no, they're different. If we're, we've been talking a lot about charter legal, and there are people who are definitely, I mean, Bernie is a lot of knowledge about that. He may not want to deal with public comment, if I'm guessing.
I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't hear that.
Oh,
we're all trapped by the microphones.
That I was just guessing, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that you wouldn't put your energy as much into public interaction, public comment, but because of your knowledge of and experience with municipal things, you might be more interested in the nitty gritty, in the you're talking consultant, which has its place, and other people are saying we want to be focusing on something else, and it doesn't mean we should be doing one or the other. We could divide our efforts.
We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. I am interested in public interaction because I really view this as a process of learning. For me to learn, I'm always finding something new whenever I get involved with a public project. There's always something new that comes up, but also to help people understand what the prospects and limits are of the local government. We have a bad habit. We talk about the government. Well, I'm sorry. There are dozens of governments, and we happen to have one here in Amherst that people really need to have a good working understanding of, and that's respectful of those people. So, that's where I'm coming from.
Raphael?
Yeah, Dan, I'm totally in agreement with you in terms of like, yes, you could chew and walk gum at the same time, but I'm just looking at the charge. I don't want to lose sight of that. I don't want that to be on the back burner. We have work to do in terms of like making folks aware of this process. Where are we? What have we done? We're also charged with like deploying some mechanisms to get feedback about folks in this city, view of said charter. What are their concerns? There's some work we have to do there. And I think about our conversation tonight, and I think it's just tricky when we need to be really prepared if we're having like conversations with the public and they have questions about X, Y, or Z, and we are making a lot of mistakes about particular things, that's just tricky. So I think we need to do that work about clarity, but also what's the move forward in terms of what that sort of feedback loop outreach will look like. I think we really need to move on that.
So
Thanks.
basically, what I'm hearing is I've heard interest in Article 2, pretty much everything within Article 2. I've heard interested in reviewing some areas of Article 3, some areas of Article 4. I've heard interest in reviewing pretty much the entire Article 5. I've heard interest in reviewing some areas of Article 6. I've heard interest in reviewing pretty much the entire Article 7, and I've heard interest in reviewing pretty much the entire Article 8, as well as potentially deleting Article 10. So basically everything besides 1 and 9, everyone seems somewhat interested in. So basically, for anyone watching at home, we're reviewing pretty much 90% of the charter. So
But Julian, I think like
Yeah.
people spoke, you said people are interested. I listened. So I get that people are interested, but it's great to consider what that interest means. Is it change parts of said charter, or is it I want to engage the public in learning more about where they are in that space?
Right.
And that is complex work. And I do also think like we need some assistance, I think, with doing what Bernie did with us tonight in terms of clarification about parts of the charter. I think that helps this process. The tricky thing is you had folks here sharing, I heard from this group or this person. Yes, but I think we want the data material in front of us to review. I just think, to me, like I fear, like it's just those few who are appointed or have engaging in this who have the most say. And I want to really try to push for outreach to try to engage more members of the community.
Andy?
I guess I'd like to take Dan's idea and look at as many other charter review committee processes as we can and see what their initial and subsequent outreach looked like. How did they frame the questions? How did they get legal answers? And so I'm willing to, Dan, if you want to point me to the reports, I'm willing to look at that or
They're more, that's just a selection.
so, or
Really,
if you want to tell me how to find them, I'd be happy to look at that and sort of, because I really think that the information we get is going to be wholly dependent on how good the questions are that we ask. So
I agree.
we can learn a lot from what other people have done. And again, that's where maybe people who have worked with multiple towns would be able to help us also frame that.
So what I'm hearing is there's
Could
interest.
I pause for a minute? Julian, could I pause? Erica had her
Yeah.
hand up. I don't
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I really care about process, and you may have heard me make comments to that effect so far. And this is a great survey of what we're all in, of specific sections that individual people are really interested in. I'm thinking about sort of where we need to end in our arc as a committee, and that is a report. And I want that report to be really evidence-based. And the evidence, I think, is going to come from the outreach, not from what we individually feel about parts to highlight or parts that should be tweaked or what a consultant tells us can and can't be done. That's all going to inform, right? But it's not any one of those things. We as a committee are not changing anything. We're making recommendations for what we think, based on what we've heard and what we have read in detail in the charter, needs to be changed or could conceivably be changed, or what we think should be looked at really hard by a bunch of lawyers or whatever. But it's all going to be evidence-based. And I feel like what I'm thinking as we're doing this process, and I realize everybody wants to move on, but I really feel the importance of taking the sections that we're focused on and spending the time to craft good questions based on them. because we're going to now rush to put out a survey. And I want that survey to be meaningful. And I want that survey to be, because we don't get 17 shots at it, we get a couple to get out to the public and to get good, right? You don't ask a good question, you don't get a good answer. And so I'm thinking, like, if I'm writing a report and my evidence isn't good, because I rush to ask, kind of unthoughtful questions, then I've spent a year doing something that is not as solid as it could be. That's just my thoughts on process tonight, and I really want to figure out a way, because I'm looking ahead at, like, we have a whole other set of tasks for tonight, but we also have a proposed timeline, and the timeline is catapulting us into putting out a survey as of, I think, next week. I don't feel that we're ready to do that. I'm really glad to hear what everybody is interested in. It's meaningful and it's rich and it's deep, and there's, like, I want to sit around with you all for another 3 hours and talk about sections of the charter, but we need to craft those questions, because otherwise this is an insular conversation and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, so I think you point out a decent point, which is we're still on agenda point 4. We have touched on a little some of the other agenda points, not much. Good news is we have a meeting on Wednesday, the 18th, where we can take up some of this. And I'm looking to sort of summarize this discussion. And I understand there's interest in basically everything besides Article 1 and Article 9. But our next agenda point is to develop priority areas. And to keep this short, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a motion that I move that the Charter Review Committee intentionally prioritize Article 2, Article 5, and Article 8 in its efforts for public outreach. Specifically, when these are the things we should look into drafting our questions that we ask the public about, is what I'm thinking. Meg, you want a second?
I just feel so strongly in agreement with what Erica said.
Point of order for discussion, you need to second.
Yeah. So to discuss it, we need a second.
All right, I'll second it. just
Okay.
so we-
Go ahead.
I agree so strongly with Erica. I feel like we can identify the parts of the charter that we want to focus on first, but I'm really eager to also figure out how we're going to frame this so that we ask the right questions in the right way. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's a whole other conversation, but I thought it was really important that we don't just go dashing out there saying, well, what do you think about Article 2? Well, how about 5? And then there's always 8.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of articles. I understand we have to, the goal of our job tonight is to make some priorities in what we want to ask the public about. It's not ruling anything out. It's just saying, so when I or somebody else comes back to us with trying to get public input, when a consultant comes to us, what do you want us to focus on, etc., we have something we can tell them, rather than just everybody on this committee has ideas about the entire charter. Andy?
Yeah, I'm more comfortable having heard this discussion and then looking at how other places have done it to sort of say, maybe the initial outreach is more general, and it's like what parts of the way the government's working are problematic to you or people you know. What do you anything specific about the legislature, about the council, anything specific about the manager, anything specific about elections, sort of broad categories rather than specific articles. So I'm not sure we need to prioritize quite yet. I think we should figure out and look at how other places have asked the questions so that they get feedback on the things that people care about, not necessarily narrow it to a couple of the articles to start.
Other comment, Raphael?
Andy, I think that's how Cambridge approached it. Some really basic public facing documents that went out to various places. And they began there. And circling back to feedback mechanisms, we talk about questions, but I think the type of feedback mechanisms we use, we'll really have to be thoughtful about the types of questions. And that's the work I think I would really love to engage with. Like the how, and it doesn't have to be one way. And that's work. And I appreciate Dan's point about perhaps subcommittee doing some of this work.
Erica and then Andy?
I'd like to ask, how can we proceed with that kind of work, given our limitations of not being able to really do work outside of this time together? Because I agree that that's really important work, and as I've said, and I think some of you might agree, I'm stuck on how do we do that without dedicating a whole meeting to it. If we have to dedicate a whole meeting to it, then let's do that. But I think that's where I'm stuck. I don't know how to proceed quickly. It's hard to edit things as a group of 9, but it's also, we're limited by some rules about doing things in public.
Yeah.
That, I think you'll find that some of the answers to that very important question are in discussion item 6, which is budgetary resources. Regardless, I'd like us to find a way that even if we're taking a split vote, we're not at consensus, I'd like for us to have something that we can say, okay, these are the areas that we as a committee are curious about, are interested in. They span with everybody's own interpretation, what they want. But these are the areas we want to prioritize. When we go out to the public to get input, we need to ask them a question other than just, what do you think of the charter, or what do you think of Amherst government? We need to ask more specific questions than just that. And I think I'm open to take a competing motion, some idea on how we do that exactly, but we can't just say, we had this discussion and we're interested in everything. Andy?
Yeah, I'd like to have the discussion about specifically what kind of questions we're going to ask, not necessarily what sections we're going to ask about, but really focus on what would an initial outreach process look like, in terms of what questions will we ask and how would those be tailored for counselors versus general public and everybody in between.
Right.
So I think somehow we need to have a starting point for that. And again, this is where a consultant could be helpful if we had one
Exactly.
in-house now, because we could say, look at what other places have done, come back to us with, proposed questions to ask in a public forum or in a survey or whatever, and they could bring it back and we could reflect.
Right.
Otherwise, we're left with, me volunteering to write something up and send it in to
Right.
put in the packet, and then we talk about it at the next meeting, or we create a subcommittee to work on that kind of thing. So, but I would encourage a amendment to the motion that would be something like, can we identify some priority questions by the next meeting for the group to discuss, or something, for our outreach
Sure,
questions?
yeah, I mean, I'll say, I developed a Google form for public input that's, I think, been sent to everybody, or everybody should be able to access. I don't know how many folks reviewed it or not, that's okay. Basically, it's a very, very rough draft at what exactly questions could be asked. And those aren't necessarily the questions we'll ask, they're just what popped on the top of my head when I did the form. So we could take a look at that, sort of move around, bring us to agenda item 9 is a way to move this discussion forward. I would be open to that. And then we could go back and sort of say, hey, we like this in here, we don't like this. Let's have Julian come up with a new form that has some of these questions and some new ones. Do we want to do that?
I
If
would
so,
prefer talking about what Andy suggested, let's start to frame some questions. I've been doing some reading and looking at other charter reviews that have occurred in the state, all of which are larger places than we are. I also think that we need to get a budget request in
Right.
so that we're going to need some help. And you're looking at the timeline, the consultant comes in sometime in February, which is the absolute wrong time. We should have those resources available to us now while we're shaping this so we can save time and move forward with the stuff we need to do. We can talk about how we're going to solicit public input all day, but unless we've got somebody or people who can help frame that and give us the opportunity to get out there, we're not going to go anywhere.
Exactly.
So let's go ahead. I would, there's a sample budget request, which I think is perfectly okay, except I'd strike the word free cash. You don't have to tell the town manager where to find the money. And submit it to him.
Yeah, Meg, go ahead.
Well, finish responding to Bernie.
I agree. I think that maybe a good way for us to move this discussion forward is we need a consultant. We're going to need to develop an area for what that consultant is and what they do. So we can't just say, throw them at the charter. We have to say, focus on this. We're concerned about this. We're concerned about this over here. If that means we take another meeting and come back to it, that's perfectly okay. But we do need to do that eventually. And I'm not sure this committee is completely ready to do that. At least it doesn't sound it. So I agree with what Bernie said. We should look at that document. Would you mind moving on to agenda point number 5 and sharing the draft that I proposed? 6, sorry, thank you. And sharing the draft that I proposed for a supplemental budget request to the town manager. That
Sure,
may be
you
a
do
good
have
way.
a motion on the floor.
We do. Do we want to?
Did you want to withdraw?
I made it.
or-
Yeah, let me withdraw that motion. So, because I think Bernie has a good suggestion. Let me withdraw that motion.
What is it we're doing right now? And I'm also,
We're
okay, but I just
moving.
want to note, are we, just as a little time check here,
Yeah, we're well over time. Do
so
we want to set a committee agreement time to wrap up and push anything after that to the
well,
next
what do
meeting?
we need to do before we wrap?
We are hoping to vote this budget request
Vote
right
for the
here.
budget, okay.
And we're also hoping to, it's going to be a longer discussion, but Dan wants to discuss the website structure and Dan would like to propose some edits, changes to the website. And then we have the timeline that we want to work on and amend. And then we have that Google form that I talked about and a few sort of miscellaneous things
How
as
long
well.
are we going to do all that?
We might not do all that tonight.
So I'm just saying we should prioritize what we want to do.
Right, which is what we're doing right now. This is, if you look up on the screen, this is exactly what we're voting on. I think the first priority is that we can get a consultant in here. That's fine. So I make the motion to approve sending the above supplemental budget request to the town manager to request these funds for our committee for the below purposes. Second, excellent. Questions before we vote? Yes.
Bernie had suggested removing the funding source.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we do that as a friendly amendment? Yes. Sure.
Sure.
So I agree to the friendly amendment from free cash. Just strike that. And other than that, other committee comments before we vote on this? Erica?
I just wanted to note for the record that I did solicit suggestions for budget items from the committee and in a form, and several people did respond to that. We haven't put that on the table.
Ah,
I understand people want to just vote on this, but I don't think that this proposal takes any of that into consideration. So I just wanted to say that for the record.
That
Okay.
isn't completely correct. I just want to correct you for the record. This, I looked at, before I drafted this proposal, I looked at the responses to that form, and I can guarantee you that consulting was in that form, that townwide mailer was a response someone gave in that form, funding for childcare and funding for refreshments were all in that form. So before I drafted this, I looked at what was on that form and used that to help me put this into a budget, as well as the amounts. So for folks who did fill out the form, it may not include exactly what you wrote, but it's comprehensive and representative of most of it. Raphael and then Andy.
Erica, perhaps you can't do this now, but am I to believe that you're saying there are things that were submitted that don't appear here, or maybe you don't know?
Not necessarily. I just, I was under the impression that we were heading towards a discussion of the budget items in order to put together a proposal. And this proposal was put together, and I wasn't clear on the fact that what people submitted was included in this proposal.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, Erica, are there any categories that wouldn't fit into these categories?
Yeah.
And that, in terms of ideas that were submitted, or can we make this general enough so, you know, maybe we get the 30,000 and we can use it for consulting, printed materials, childcare, refreshments, and social media, rather than, you know, having to ask to go to
Exactly.
3,000 or something for,
Yep.
you know, if one category
Right.
versus another.
But it may be possible. I was just pointing out we haven't examined it. Just as an example, somebody posted something about survey platforms. Sometimes those have costs affiliated. We can do everything through free platforms like Google, but you can also have a slightly more sophisticated survey platforms. They just have costs affiliated. The person who submitted it didn't put a cost because maybe they just didn't have a way to do the research on what that costs, and therefore it'll be left out of this request. That's fine. I just wanted to point out this may or may not include all of the things that people had in mind, because we haven't had a full budget request discussion. We're voting on these items in front of us.
Right. I'll just say I did see that request and I looked into how much it would cost, and I just thought it didn't seem like an effective use of funding to sort of buy a fancier version of Google Forms. And that's why I didn't put it on here. But yes, I did see that. Andy, or Marcus, Andy, you already had a question, so I'll go Marcus, then Andy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, how much was that cost? You said you
I looked
it.
into it. It looked like it was $600-700 for a nice facilitated form. That basically, like, they don't actually give it out to you. It's just a fancy sort of version of Google Forms, is how I understood it, with better ways to market it and that.
But given the budget, would it not be worth just sticking something in there as a cover?
We could.
Yeah.
I just don't see. I just wouldn't. I don't see why we would spend money on doing something that's basically just a nicer version of something we can do for free. Just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, Andy.
Some of that software, you can have it drill down in terms of, if somebody says yes to a question, then it sends you to another question. And if
Right.
they say no, you can't, and you can. So I'm just wondering if, instead of having 3 lines, if we have 1 line that says $30,000 for expenses of the committee, such as, you know, including consulting services, outreach
Including but not limited
materials,
to.
survey support, you know, and other related activities, so that we're
Yep.
not being cutting anything out at this point, but we're basically asking for the same amount.
Yeah, we could. I would be open to that sort of amendment. I would just be careful that we still do want to say, here's some of what we're gonna do with the funds. The town manager's probably, at least if I were the town manager, I wouldn't approve a request for funds that just says $30,000 and the committee will do what we want.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that part. I also agree with you, because we need flexibility. I just
Right.
worry by delineating everything, if we overspend one and not under, it just too much oversight. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I saw some hands online. Bernie, Erica, Meg, you got it. Okay, great.
Real quick, this isn't a line item budget, for one. And for
Right.
two, I agree with Andy. We should have just a lump sum and say, for these purposes, including these purposes. And that should fly. I mean, you have to convince the comptroller that you're spending the money correctly, but not the manager. But, just Andy's suggestion is a good one. And Erica, I apologize for pushing this and not thinking about the work that you did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not about the work I've done, more about people put ideas out and with an expectation of a discussion, that's all. But I was raising my hand to say, I wasn't really put as a motion, but sort of seconding what Andy suggested is if we're gonna do this, if we're gonna vote on this, making a slightly general category, and a question. The consultant number of 22.5 seems really specific, and I wondered if there was an actual estimate requested that's attached to.
There wasn't a formal estimate, but I did speak with some consultants on the phone who gave me a rough range between $20,000 and $25,000 for those services. So I sort of broke that in the middle. But I am definitely open to, I guess, I would be open to the amendment of $30,000, strike from free cash, and then just say $30,000 to fund consulting services with meeting facilitation assistance, printed outreach materials, townwide mailers, outreach fund, as well as outreach funding for childcare, refreshments, social media. I would be willing to take that amendment, and then the committee has some more leeway as to how we break it up. That seems appropriate. Second, are you open to that?
I'm open to, I just would like to have it say something like for the purposes of the committee, including boom, boom,
Yep.
boom, so that we're not just, we
Yep.
suddenly realize we need something that's not specifically mentioned.
Exactly. And like if consultant is 22,700, we don't want to limit ourselves in that way. Marcus?
Yeah, just two things. One thing, I mean, have we considered, and actually, sorry, Erica, I meant to write this to you, travel to a town to talk to them directly? Or are we thinking about more Zoom type calls with, if we have particular things, we could go on a bit of a fact finding mission to a couple of places. Maybe there's need to cover that travel. Or if the town travels, I don't know. Does the town have a minibus we use, or is it like a party bus? And then the other one, you mentioned that you've been given sort of a range. I would not take the middle, always take the highest. So I would bump this up to 25 plus everything else, just because, but the number 22.5, take it up to 25 and then add the $5,000 and the 2.5 on top of that, because we always want to be conservative.
Yeah, so I'll agree to the 30,000. No, 30,000 in total. And not having it broken up in this manner.
I was saying 32.5, yeah. So take that up to 25, yeah.
Give us some padding.
Yeah, you never want to be in the middle of your. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could. Yeah, we could. Yeah. Soon enough it'll be. So, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. 32.5. So with the appropriation of 32,500, delete from free cash, then make that all. Athena, I should edit this before we actually vote on it, right?
Ken might have it in his notes. I have to request 32,500 to fund consulting, outreach, surveys, and other related activities.
That's appropriate.
Sounds good.
That's okay. Childcare,
I would add childcare in
Yeah.
there too, just to
I agree.
sweeten the pot.
And
It
like
looks
social,
good.
social media. I would also add social media to that, because we might want to like purchase ads or stuff like that online. Okay, Erica.
Thank you. Because the consulting is the better part of this sum total, even though we're asking for a sum total with some play in it, could you say more about what would be included or allowed in that consulting fee? Are we talking about coming and meeting with us once and writing a summary, with a sort of series of meetings? I think that matters, because if we are agreeing to allot $20,000 to $25,000 for consulting, and we're not exactly clear on that gets us to where we need to be, I think that matters.
That would include like 8 to 10 meetings, having someone come out, having someone help a little bit with meeting facilitation, and certainly having someone draft and sort of present us with what other municipalities have done, like what Dan and Andy were talking about, saying, here's some options. You don't need to do this. Obviously, Amherst is specific, but here's some options of what other municipalities have done and what's available, and also be able to answer sort of the questions of like, basically, here's what you want to do. I'll use the budget example. Here's what you might want to do with the budget. Here's the statutory limit. Here's a workaround or something you can do instead that achieves a similar goal. So that's sort of the answer to your question. Andy?
Yeah, I wouldn't, I mean, I think the fact that we have 32,500 as the overall, it gives us some play. So whether, if we find
Yep.
a cut rate consultant, or if we decide we want very, very specific consulting that wouldn't
Yep.
cost that much, then we have more for other things. So I'm not too concerned about, I think if we get the number in, we have the right words and the activities such as boom, boom, boom,
Yep.
then I think we're covered.
Yep. Meg?
I agree with Andy, and our thoughts may change as we go along. So for example, we might want some group facilitation or focus groups, or
Right.
it's very hard. Some of it will be iterative as we go along. I just also, now that I have my finger on this, thank Erica for sending out the
Form.
survey. Appreciated it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, we did. Exactly. Okay. So Erica?
Sorry, I have to ask are we planning to vote? Because I have one more
Yes.
question.
We are.
Okay. If and when we get this money, are we going to go through a review process to decide who we're paying?
Yes, yes,
consulting?
absolutely. And we will have to, as I was talking about earlier, the committee will have to develop what our priorities are, what we want, and then ask for what's called an RFP, or request for proposals, from available consultants in the area to give us an amount of money and what services they can provide in writing. And then it's up to this committee for us to vote on and choose one, develop via A, cost, B, which one fits our priorities best and we believe can provide us the best services. That's our job. I imagine before we actually go out to get RFPs for consultants, we will need to develop our committee priorities, which it seems the committee isn't ready to do tonight, which is fine, but we'll need to do that before we can get a consultant. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was more a clarification of process, so that
No
it's
problem.
it's in our minutes as part of what we're setting up to do.
Gotcha. So there's been quite a few amendments proposed to this, which I'm accepting, but I'm not seeing it reflected on my screen. So I think it would be good for us before we vote. Could either Athena or Ken read out what we have as the amendments to the motion?
I have to fund consulting, outreach, survey, childcare, social media, and other related activities, and a changed amount of $32,500.
And, okay, great, that sounds good to me. So this motion with those things changed, I move, Andy seconded. Can, any other questions, comments before we move forward with a vote? If anyone wants to make any other changes besides that, please make them. No, okay, great. Can we start the voting process? I'll start with Dan,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Meg,
Yes,
Ken,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Erica,
Yes.
Raphael,
Yes.
Bernie.
Yes.
Yes, I'm in favor as well. Okay, great. So we unanimously approved a request. Athena, should I send that to the town manager or should you, or who should send that?
You should, if you want to make changes to that document, or I can make changes and send it, it's up to you.
Okay, I'll make the changes we agreed to that document, and hopefully be able to get it sent out, tomorrow afternoon, maybe Saturday. So he'd probably receive it Monday. Great. Excellent. Thank you. And Athena or Ken, if you could send me the exact changes so I'm not MacGyvering what people said in ways they don't like that I'll be yelled at about later. That's great.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great. So our next thing is website structure. Dan, yes, Meg, sorry.
ask again, are we just going to continue with this agenda until we're done? Or are we going to think about how long we
Do
want to have our
people
meeting?
want to make a time limit for when we leave? We can
Or are
definitely make
things,
a
I
time
think we
limit.
have a meeting scheduled for next week.
Yeah, let's,
So I just
okay.
like to, it's
I'm-
just hard to, I'd like a break. If we're
Yep.
going to go for 2 more hours.
I
need-
know, we're not, don't worry. I move that we get out of here by 9. Does that seem fair?
Second.
Second, great.
And how about a
um,
plan for doing that?
Yeah, a plan for doing that is we will work through the agenda until 9 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock, I'll move to adjourn and we'll be done, and the
Wait,
other
let me just ask
points will
clarification.
be added to the agenda for the
So are you
18th.
saying we're just going to go through this until 9 o'clock and then stop? Or should we
Yes.
prioritize things that ought to be done at this meeting
I
better
would-
than next week? And does everybody, for example, know the meeting is next week and all that?
Yep, the meeting is next week on the 18th at 6 PM.
And I'd like
Online.
to have at least a little minute to talk about that meeting, some things that we may want to do before the end of the year,
Got it.
based on some stuff going on with Athena's, with our schedule for the future.
That is a-okay. We can definitely do that in future agenda planning or topics not anticipated, which I'll allot a few minutes for at the end. However, I don't want to move the entire agenda around and prioritize because the purpose of us having an agenda is so that the public can know what we're talking about and when. So I would be uncomfortable to move around what we're doing on the agenda to that extent. However, I will be sure to include 10 minutes or so at the end for you. Erica.
Before we just decide to go to 9 o'clock, part of our ability to do this meeting is the presence of Athena. So can we please consult on whether that's actually possible?
I agree. Is that okay with you, Athena? Okay, great. I don't want to keep Athena here till 11 o'clock. Yeah.
I'm just checking. I know our maintenance staff person stays at least until 9, but I'll make sure that we're good.
Okay, if that's an issue, please let me know. We can end earlier too. Great. I don't want to, I feel bad. I don't want to keep town staff people from their families. So I will move through as fast as we can. Website structure. Dan, you had something that got sent to the entire committee. If you want to make a motion or discuss that, the floor is yours.
Just a point of order. We haven't
Yeah.
actually voted on going to 9 yet. We just had a motion and
Oh,
a second.
Yes, okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I moved.
I think we have consensus. We can just move on.
Seconded. I was sort of assuming, I was like, we're okay to have consensus and move on from that. I sort of assumed consensus would be okay, but I will move us along to Dan, assuming we have that consensus.
So for the sake of brevity, I think that what I'm going to say is I have kind of condensed what I put in the legal references file from a few meetings ago. And essentially the gist of it is that I think that the language about Massachusetts law that's on the website is really needs to be examined because I don't think it's accurate. So I would like you all to, it would make more sense if everyone has can read this and we can discuss it then. So to really urge for a meaningful discussion of this, for that to happen and to move this to the next meeting.
Athena? I saw Athena's hand up first and then I'll, yep.
The statement of purpose is pulled directly from your charge, which was adopted by the town council. So to make a change to the statement of purpose in the charge, you'd have to ask the town council to make a change.
Well, I guess to be direct, I think it's called for, and I can get into it now if that's what we should do.
Can we see this, the chart? Where do we find the charge?
It's on your
It's
webpage.
on
I
the
can pull it
town
up.
webpage under Charter Commission. There's a link.
I have
to
it up. I
Yeah, if
can.
you go to it, yeah.
Yep. And did you
I
want?
mean, well, to elaborate, I think that the language there is both vague in many ways and where it's specific. Where it's specific, I don't think it's correct. I mean, to say that this section of law can't be used to change those things. If you look at the full text of section 10, it isn't really what it says. And you can say how it can be used and who it can be used by. It can be used by any citizen, any voter in Amherst. Any one of us could go tomorrow to the town clerk and start a charter commission. Yeah,
You have to get it.
You have to
no,
get,
no,
like,
I mean, but
200
you
signatures.
go to the town clerk and get the forms. I mean, it's a right of anyone to do this.
That's a charter commission.
Yeah, a charter commission. So if you, to say it can't be used isn't, I mean, it actually, the way that's quoted is out of context. If you read it read the full thing, it says, all right, if you already have a charter, this is how the council can do that, but only a charter commission can propose a charter commission duly elected under the rules of this legislation can propose changes that in any way relate to, et cetera. The use of this is for any citizen, any voter in the town, and to say, how do I initiate charter change? You can go to the council, to one counselor, and say, would you sponsor this? They can say yes. If it's about, so for instance, I want to make the term of charter review 6 years instead of 10. That's not excluded by the requirement that only a charter commission can do it. If I want to increase the length of service of a counselor, that the council can't do. But I mean, this is actually, someone told me, it might have been Lynn, that one of the commission efforts, maybe from the 90s, and I don't know the history, was started by a farmer. And he said, I've had it with the town meeting. He went, he looked at the law, he got the things, the form in the correct paper, and he went out and got the signatures. So say it can't be used, we can say how it can be used and who can use it. Any of us could do this to start the process. Yes, you've got to get 15% of the voters. It's 2,107 voters right now. But this is,
Which it will be a lot more with the new election, given that there's more participants.
right, right, that was from,
Yep.
that's on the current
Yep.
Secretary of State's list. But it's inaccurate. The language is inaccurate. It is a matter the council has to take up. But this is, I think, in really basic ways, they're mischaracterizations of what the
Sure.
law says. I would like to, I mean, if you've looked through this, what I really tried to do is give the full, what's the context of that quote? Because in the context of it, only a charter commission can propose those changes. And so what does that mean? How would you use this law? Well, you'd look at it and say, okay, I want to change that the council can't enact, then I'm going to have to go and get a charter commission going. And this isn't talking about special acts because that's turned into, that's a whole different thing. But I think it simply isn't correct. And I think that this needs to be examined by the council. It does. It isn't what the law says. And if necessary, we should sit with the full of section 10 and look at it. Or the whole law. I mean, the thing about this is that the 43B is an integrated chapter of law. It is, all of the pieces interrelate. You have sections 3 through 9, or is it sections? Is that what they call it? Sections 3 through 9 deal with the charter commission. Then you get to 10. Okay, you've already had this would be us now. Now you have a charter. And it's basically a roadmap. It's a flow chart. You can go this way. And what it really is it offers the council limited power to initiate charter change, but it reserves a fuller power to a charter commission. It's what it basically says is that the legislature can't self-deal. You can't get elected to office and then say, hey, why don't we have longer terms? You have to have an outside body that proposes that. You can't get power and then change the way you get power. You can't get power and then say, I propose we take power from the town manager, excuse me. So for me, in what I wrote, there's one part of it was just being maybe more what Meg was doing, which is like, let's make this the website more personal, more inviting. And they're two really separate things. That's one thing. But the thing about the law, I feel like there's been a lack of clarity about this. I mean, like we were talking earlier about what when can't we do about as a city under Massachusetts law. But there's even lack of clarity about this issue. And that we certainly should know. And again, this is something else is this charge. No, we're not looking at what I'm.
Right, this is the purpose section of the charge,
Yeah.
which is what's on the webpage.
Yeah, well, sorry. I was looking at the website. Yeah, we're not looking at the same thing. So
This is the chart.
yeah, but if you look at the website, it's not at the charge from the website. It's just look at the top page of the website.
I believe this is from the state website. This, yep. Oh, on the, okay, yeah.
Yeah, like this thing of the purpose. And this thing about here, look at this. Cannot be used there it is. Cannot be used. I don't know.
I need to share it, so.
It's okay.
Yeah. I think that there's been a lack of clarity about this.
Andy, I saw your hand up.
It's in conflict with what you've said, Andy. And I think it really needs to be looked at hard.
I agree, there's a lack of clarity here, and that to an extent, Dan's interpretation of the law and the interpretation with the town council's charge are somewhat contradictory, and we as a committee have to address that. It doesn't necessarily mean I see a potential solution to this to rather than sort of using the committee's time to go after the town council to ask for a change in this, which I don't feel like would be the best use of the committee's time. It may be better to say, hey, let's ask Athena to add this document that Dan has presented to the website so that members of the public can go on, access both interpretations of the law, and form their own opinion of it, and can come to us with that if they're so inclined. Andy, and then Marcus, and considering time, I'd like to see a motion on it, get us out of here, or postponing it to the next meeting. If Dan's amenable to what I'm saying, he can. Yeah.
I guess I'm confused. I'm looking for clarification. I don't understand what the problem is. I think we had the charge. If the purpose, if the description of the purpose is not consistent with the charge, we could just put the charge up there, the entire charge, but I'm pretty clear. I think we've been pretty clear on what we're doing here. We're taking input on, fairly broadly, and we're going to list things that the council can change in and of itself, and things that might require another charter commission or legislative action. So I don't feel like we're limited. So I'm just sort of like, what is I don't quite understand.
Oh, I
It's
think it's a simple solution, right? Someone needs to copy the purpose off the charge onto here. Obviously, someone's tried to do a bit of summary or something to try and make it shorter. It just needs a straight cut and paste.
So that would be my motion would be substitute the entire charge right up front rather than just the purpose.
We have
Yeah.
to ask Athena to do that.
No, I understand
But
that.
yes,
It's
I
obviously,
get
I
what
would
you're
think the
saying.
consternation has come about because there's been some editing or, something to try and make it fit on a page or whatever. And it's, yeah.
Why don't I
it's-
just
think
put
you
a link
cut
in?
and paste.
Excuse me, Dan?
I think that the issue is in the charge as well. I mean, the way that this 43B section 10 has been focused on it isn't, I don't think it's true. Can't be used to change these things. It's exactly what section 10 actually is used for. It tells you how to go about changing the part of the charter that the council can't initiate change alone. It basically, it prevents this, this is its function. So I don't understand what I did in the thing I wrote. I'd like to, if we can go to what I wrote, is to really try to give, look, if you look at, can we see that thing? That thing? Yeah, the thing I wrote. Yeah, so, I mean, look at, there it is. So what does the charter say about changing the charter? That's the first thing. This is section 9.1. This charter may be replaced, revised, or amended via any of the means made available under the law or the Constitution. We know those means are three. No, I have this. So the first thing is why is this referred to as section 10 and all the other, why is that vague? All the other laws, when actually it's the page that's right above section 10 in the same law. Why the lack of specificity? That's one question I have. And it's also it kind of mischaracterizes the law in talking about section 10 as if it's independent. It's part of a whole mechanism. It's like taking a gear out of a machine and saying this is the gear, but the gear fits into this machine that's an integrated mechanism. Goes from, the first part is 3 through 9 is the Charter Commission. You get to 10, you want to change something, here's what the council can do. But if you want to change the central allocation of power, you have to go back to section 3. It's talking about it in isolation when it's actually one unified mechanism of law. Then you go on, I guess I just feel like there's a lack of clarity and it's not specified. Why only section 10? What the charter says in section 9.1, it does not focus on section 10. If you want to say, give someone a really complete reference to what, to the law about this, it's all of chapter 43B. I think focusing on section 10 is actually focusing on the mechanism that's the least ability to propose charter change.
I I agree, it doesn't make sense to cherry pick section 10 over any of the other sections here. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm noticing the time, and it's
Yeah.
my job as chair to keep us
Yeah.
on track. And I'm noticing that Andy has his hand up. Meg, did you have your hand up? No? Okay, good. So Andy has his hand up. I heard Bernie say something. Do you still want to say something, Bernie?
My suggestion was just put a link into the general laws, so people want to read the whole thing, they can go link to it and read the whole thing.
He said to put a link at the website in the entire thing.
Yeah,
That's what he said.
I'm going to move that we continue because I don't think it can be meaningfully
Mhm.
addressed, but we've talked about our function is education. And so to link to let them read the whole thing, you could spell out, this is what I'm trying to do here. Excuse me. The charter says under any procedure made available. Well, so this is what it's explaining. This comes from the Constitution and 43B. And it says, and this is also really key. Again, this is getting the public to understand this, which I don't think there's clarity about here. Who has the power? I mean, I've heard the Charter Review Committee has the power to change things. No, we
Yeah.
don't. The council has the
don't.
power. No, we don't. The charter, none of this. It's like, so who has the power to change a charter? It's the voters. To
Right.
really lay this out clearly, if we're talking about educating people, that I think that matters.
I'm noticing the time.
Yeah.
I appreciate you probably have something great to say, Andy, but I'm gonna ask us I will put this on the agenda for the 18th. I'm sure it will go on the agenda for the 18th. Andy, you can talk about your concerns briefly, and then I'm gonna move this to the 18th so we can finish this up.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan, you feel strongly about this. I feel like the townspeople understand that the charter commissions, because we've had one. I think they understand that that's how we changed the charter in the first place. What we're talking about is the role of the review committee. And that is, to a certain extent, circumscribed, but we've already said that we're going to talk, we're going, my understanding is that we will consider recommending things beyond our scope and beyond what the council can vote for. So I'm not interested in spending a lot more time on this. I think I understand that this is that there's things people could learn about how to change a charter. But I think our task here is within the constraints that we've already broken through of a charter committee, charter review committee. We should just focus on that. I don't feel like this is unclear enough that it's constraining us in any way. So I'd rather not spend a lot of time on it. I'd rather vote now whether we want to continue or whether we want to not do this. Or some sort of, will it be good enough to just put the charge up there with some sort of line that says if you want more, further information about how to change charters, it's in the entire 43B.
I'm
An acceptable motion at this time would be to table this item indefinitely, which would be basically not do anything with it, or continue the discussion on the 18th.
I move that we continue this discussion on the 18th. And I'm gonna ask that we vote on that now, not continue discussing. Thank you. So I will first call on Dan.
Yes.
Andy,
Respectfully, no.
okay? Meg,
Yeah, yes.
yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Just to resolve it in a.
Just
whatever way,
to,
so there's
this is
more
not a
consideration.
decision on it. It's just saying on the 18th, we're gonna
Yes.
discuss it again and make our decision then. Ken,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Bernie,
No,
Erica,
Yes.
Raphael.
Yes.
Okay, so that was 2 opposed, the motion passes, sorry, Bernie. 3 opposed, sorry. Erica, did you vote yes or no? I thought I heard yes.
I did say yes.
Yeah, that's 2 opposed. So either way, you wanna hold us here hostage? Yeah. Did Andy lock the door over there? Okay, so that we will discuss at our next meeting, and hopefully be able to resolve it at our next meeting on the 18th. Meg, could you briefly summarize? We'll also discuss that on the 18th.
There was considerably more comment on the draft letter the letter that I drafted, and appreciated what Andy wrote.
Yep.
Ken and I are going to write a third version,
Excellent.
but before the meeting in time.
And
to
you
get
got
it-
what I sent you, so you can incorporate it
Pardon?
into that. You got what I sent you, so you can incorporate it into that doc.
Yes, if anybody
Excellent.
has more feedback,
Send
Uh,
it to Meg.
please send it to us. We'll get that out
Great.
hopefully we haven't, but I thank Ken for agreeing to help on it. So
Yeah.
there's another voice, and he's one of the people who responded. Um,
Point of order.
Yep.
Is it okay for two people to work on something together outside of the meeting?
Is that allowed, Athena?
I don't, it's just, we're bringing,
Without a subcommittee, they're not meeting.
so we're bringing something to the meeting. The subcommittees
It
can
would make
meet.
things easier, but I just didn't know.
Well, subcommittees can meet to prepare something for a meeting.
Yeah, but I'm not forming a
Not a
subcommittee when we're
subcommittee.
supposed to get out of here in 1 minute.
All right,
It's
I'm
just-
gonna do it. If I don't, and I'm gonna, Ken's gonna,
You,
I'll call him up.
Okay. Athena, is that allowed?
I'm not the enforcing authority for the open meeting law. The members of this committee are responsible for abiding by the law. I can advise you, but I'm not going to tell you that you can't do something. If you feel that you can, then it's members of the public who can call you on it and take you to task with the AG's office.
And I don't think that Meg should be going to task with the AG's office. So I would ask that solely Meg, sorry to exclude you from the party, Ken, solely Meg,
You know, it's just an
Uh,
effort to try to
take
be
a
more
reshot at
collaborative. but-
drafting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, feedback.
take
if
feedback
Some
from
people,
everybody,
many
including
people
Ken.
responded. People didn't agree, but my idea that this is something for the public, I was picturing it as more something like an opinion piece, but and I'll just say one quick sentence. I've had 2 phone calls from Scott Mersbach, who's eager to cover what we're doing, and I've said, we're not ready yet. So I don't need to certainly
This
be
would
the
make us ready.
I'm not the one who necessarily should talk with him anyway, but he was calling me just to get information about how it's going.
Talk to me.
Over.
I'm the chair. I'm happy.
You're the
I-
one who should. I'm just
Technically, the chair
reporting that-
has
I'm
the,
reporting that he's
right.
interested
exactly.
in covering what we're doing, and it's up
Mhm.
to us to be strategic about when we invite
Right.
him to do that.
Technically, the chair should be the one to take the media requests.
Right, and I'm suggesting a strategy.
Yeah.
For when we do that, perhaps coinciding with
So-
when this piece is done.
When do you think you would be able to get us that revised thing for everybody? to look
48
over?
hours before the 16th.
Great, or the 18th. So you,
18th,
by the
16th.
16th is 48 hours before the 18th. So by the 16th, that's great. Okay, I make a motion to adjourn, understanding that we haven't gotten through even half of our agenda, but that most of that will be tabled to the next meeting. Second, all in favor, Erica,
Yes.
Bernie,
yes.
Dan,
yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Meg,
Yes.
Ken,
Yes.
Marcus,
Yes.
Raphael,
Yes.
myself, yes. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you on the 18th.